Hi folks, got another beer review for you here today. We've got a Beerjerk Lucky Jack American Pale Ale. Should be interesting. This beer, according to the website, they started to add grapefruit to some of the brew tanks mid 2016, so not sure whether this particular can will have grapefruit in it or not. From the online reviews, it sounds as if some people have found small bits of white stuff floating in their beer, which some people like, some people don't. Others have not, so we'll have to open it up and have a look. So this is Norwegian beer, 4.7% ABV, 45% IBU, so reasonably bitter. And it's the mainstream beer from the brewery. A little bit of background on the brewery. It's Norwegian, obviously, and an American brewer, Mike Murphy's the guy behind this. Independent craft brewery in Norway, voted one of the world's top 100 breweries on Rate Beer, which given that 80% of the 80%, but also 80 of the top breweries were from the United States. That's a pretty good effort. And they were voted the best in Norway and had 4 of the top five Norwegian beers. So they're obviously fairly well thought of, at least in Norway and further afield. Quite why you'd want to brew in Norway, I really don't know. It's obviously difficult. Everything needs to be imported except the water. All the malt and the hops need to be imported. There's prohibition type politicians, so there's no alcohol advertising, and the alcohol tax is more than 3 times as much as it is in New Zealand, and it's reasonably substantial in New Zealand. Obviously not very good for your beer miles either if everything's being imported there and then exported again, but there you go. We'll have a look and see what we think. Had a look at the website. Nice amount of information. Always good to see that the first thing you see when you go into the website is the beers, so they seem to focus on that. A little bit of information on each beer, a bit of information on the brewery, and some interesting pictures of the beers, the brewery, and some rather hipster looking brewers. So what's in this? According to the can, we've got water, malted barley, hops and yeast, which is pretty standard sort of beer recipe. No mention of grapefruit there, so I'm picking that this particular can doesn't have any grapefruit in it. According to the website, the hops are Pearl, Citra, Amarillo and Chinook, and the malts are Pilsner and Caramel, for those of you who are into the detail. And what do they say it's supposed to taste like? They reckon it's a classic hop-forward American pale ale with lots of citrus aroma, which is why I guess they've tried adding the grapefruit to it. And they do make a grapefruit version of this already, so they're obviously right into their grapefruit. The grapefruit's the most prominent flavour, and you may also determine elderflower, pine and tropical fruits. They reckon it isn't overly bitter, and the toffee sweetness of the caramel malts balances the beer beautifully. So we'll have to have a look. They reckon it's a quaffable beer for summer, which is interesting because unfortunately it's midwinter here and it's forecast to possibly thunder and hail this afternoon, so it's probably more the weather for an imperial stout. But there you go. We'll give it a crack anyway. And I can see what they mean. There's definitely a strong citrus nose that really is quite remarkable. I can't see any floating flakes, so I think we've got a glass of maybe the slightly older brew without any added grapefruit. It's a fairly reasonable amount of carbonation, and we've got a bit of a head which has fallen away to less than a finger's width. Slightly cloudy, and pale ale. It's a sort of medium pale brown ale, I'd say. But that grapefruity pine resin smell is absolutely the first and only thing that I get on the nose. I certainly haven't picked up any elderflower yet, but then again, I'm not 100% sure that I'd know exactly what an elderflower smelt like. So there you go. The first thing you get on the palate is the piney bitterness. There's a resinous quality to it. The citrus and grapefruity smell that you get is quite far back on the palate, and so you get that very clearly on the nose, but not so much on the palate. It's an interesting beer. The reviews I read, some people really loved it. There were a number of people who gave it 10 out of 10 or 5 out of 5, 100%, and would have made it one of their favourite beers. It's a very sessionable beer, very quaffable or sessionable beer, I'd say. The bitterness is very well balanced with those malts, and I'd say that the caramel malt in particular gives it just a hint of sweetness, which balances out the hops. And there's obviously it's quite complex. There's a few layers there, which will be those 4 different varieties of hops, and they've managed to get pleasant citrus notes without this really strong bitterness and pine resin flavours that you sometimes get, which can be a little bit overpowering. So yeah, it's definitely worth a try. Whether it's worth importing it all the way from Norway, I don't know. At the moment, as of July 2017, it's not available in New Zealand except via the Beerjerk program, so most people will have already drunk theirs. But it is exported to Australia, so you may be able to pick one up if they bring one over, or if you happen to be going over the ditch. So it's a very drinkable beer, but it's not so stunning that I'd be giving it a 10 out of 10. I'd probably give it around a 16 out of 20. I think that's a fair score. It's well done, and there's no major faults, but it's not stunning enough for me to be elevating it right up there. So yeah, 16 out of 20. Lucky Jack American Pale Ale, well worth a try, and happy drinking. Cheers.